This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
About the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center.
Good afternoon, you're watching Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, and we're joined this afternoon by Lisa B. Thompson, the woman I affectionately call L Boogie, who's coming to us from her office at Harvard, the Du Bois Institute, where she is a fellow this year. Lisa Thompson is Associate Professor of English at the State University of New York, again, currently a fellow at the Du Bois Institute at Harvard University. She is the author of Beyond the Black Lady, Sexuality and the New African American Middle Class, University of Illinois Press, 2009. And she's also a playwright, the writer of Single Black Female, which was chosen by LA Weekly, the 2005 Theater Award for Best Comedy. And the New York Times says of Single Black Female, socially significant and very entertaining. How are you doing this afternoon, Lisa?
I'm doing well, thank you. I have to unfortunately say I did not win that theater award. I was nominated. It's nice to be nominated among so many. I lost to a play that featured Loretta Devine, so
Yeah. Your book, Beyond the Black Lady, looks at black middle class female identity. And there's an argument to be made that, if we look at the scope of what popular culture is, American culture is, you don't find many examples of black middle class female identity. Why would you suggest that's the case? I mean, what's that really about?
I think there's a way in which the black middle class female women occupy space in the African community at large. And that is a space that is more reserved. So they're not as prominent. They're also not subject to the same kind of public ways in which black women who are poor, who have less control over their circumstances, are positioned in the world. So there's discussions about black women's sexuality, about their parenting. Does that become the same kind of issue for middle-class black women who can control the discourse and also control their lives? They're not seeking public assistance. They are not, sometimes their children aren't even in the public school system. So they're in some ways protected. They're not seen in these ways, but I'm really interested in the ways in which, given that sense of relative privilege, they are still deal with certain kind of surveillance and a certain kind of tension because of race. And I was always wary of this notion that black middle class have it so good and that they are completely a problematic force in the African American community, because so many of us are striving to have certain kind of class ascension. I come from a working class family myself, and always, looked at the church ladies and saw them in a particular way, and was really fascinated by the book that kind of opened my eyes was Voluntary Slavery, Jill Nelson's autobiography. And this notion that you can be both middle class and smart and witty, but also be a little bit outrageous. So I think that in some ways, with this new, like I consider the new black lady, beyond the black lady, these women who are trying to push against notions of what it means to be a proper black middle class woman are fascinating to me, and really open up a space for women, for black women, of all classes, to not necessarily have to embody the best and the brightest and the most of the race, but actually be more considered human.
I mean, one of the things you mentioned in the book, I mean, historically, when we think of the figure of the lady, whether it's the lady of the house or the lady of the church or the lady, of the White House, even in some contexts. Yes. There have very rarely been spaces where black women can be thought of as ladies, right? And in fact, what was a hard struggle for black women, if not the black community at whole throughout the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, was to establish this space of ladydom, if you will, for black women. And so we go 100 years later, and many of the narratives are about this kind of notion of black respectability. which you argue is a part of this performance of ladydom, for black women. But also black women are also, one of the few classes of people in the United States that are tethered to this notion of respectability. In some ways, it becomes as much a burden as it was a privilege, for black women a century ago.
Yes, and I think that's part of the issue. I don't want to necessarily argue that this is something we should, it's a frivolous attempt, because it's really a way in which to protect lives, really, to perhaps, if the belief, and sometimes I think it really did work, to perform a certain way in the world, that they would not be subject to being physically assaulted, certain kind of verbal assault, and would be able to, in fact, enter into the public space in a safe way.
Right.
And that's what I think is, is important. I mean, I often help my students, help them visualize or think about this notion of the black lady, is have them think about the life of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, right? Who was able to become Onassis after being the celebrated widow of the great President John F. Kennedy, and have them juxtapose her with Coretta Scott King, who could never add another hyphen to her name.
Right.
She went to her grave, never remarrying. We have no visible sense of her as a woman with a personal, private life after her husband's assassination. And she was a young woman.
Right, when he passed, right, yeah.
It's daunting to think about that. And what that meant for the black community is, it means a lot that she was impeccable to the end, but what does that mean for one's humanity if you are denied that part of your life? Not that everyone had to know what she was doing privately, but to not have that visual marker. It was nice, to kind of see Myrlie Evers go on, Mary Evers' widow, to go on to remarry, to have these other
have a life, right?
But it's interesting to think about juxtaposing both, Kennedy and King and their widows and what they were able to do. I mean, not only did Jacqueline Kennedy go on to remarry, but she also, at the end of her life, had a special friend. He was there at the funeral. He was there with her, and he actually has a new girlfriend now, very young. So I understand. But it's what does it mean to be denied that? Really, I mean, it's something I was kind of really fascinated by. But I think that it was a very important tool, but how we outlived it, I'm not quite sure, because a lot of us, we've discussed this notion of in our own market, but the First Lady and how people see her and talk about her body, and how comfortable do we feel with her people feeling they have the right to do that, and that she's accessible in that way. Something to consider. Have we actually completely outgrown the need for the notion of the black lady? I would like to say we are there, but it's interesting, as I navigate the world in different cities and have to think about how the world sees me.
Right. You're watching Left of Black. We're here with Lisa Thompson, the original L Boogie, professor of English at the State University of New York at Albany, current fellow at Harvard University's Du Bois Institute, and the author of Beyond the Black Lady: Sexuality and the New African American Middle Class. Since we were just talking about Michelle, I think for many Americans that, if they have any concept of black middle class womandom, the examples they would probably use would be Condoleezza Rice, which is someone who you talk a little bit about in the book, Oprah Winfrey, and Michelle Obama. And arguably none of them really are middle class women.
No.
I mean, Oprah is Oprah, right? She's a brand, right?
Yes.
And both Condoleezza Rice and Michelle Obama, for different reasons, have the kind of access to state power that everyday black women just don't have, regardless, of their class stature. Can you talk a little bit about how society thinks about these three very different women, and is it even something radical that we can see of kind of diversity of black women exist in the culture, in the way that the three of them, circulate? I thought about Condoleezza this morning, as she was doing, many of the news shows in response to the capture, to the death of bin Laden. And, she, regardless of her politics, I mean, she is a incredibly unique figure in American history.
Yes, she is, but I love, she actually came to the Du Bois Institute in the fall and gave 3 very interesting lectures. She was a former provost when I was a graduate student
at Stanford,
Stanford. And she talked about how the title of her autobiography is, I don't want to destroy it. Basically, it really captures the notion of those exceptional but not exceptional. That, you know, looking at her family, seeing herself within the lineage of African American peoples, that those that were very serious about education, were very serious about a certain kind of comportment. She grew up in Birmingham, I believe, able to give her the life that she had. They paved the way so she could have this incredible career and, you know, allow her to be within these spaces of power, from the White House to, of course, and from Stanford to the White House. So in many ways, I think she understands herself to be part of this long trajectory of Black middle class people who have, for quite a long time, been serious about education, for quite a long time, been serious about politics, and been serious about a variety of other things. I think Rice, Obama, Oprah Winfrey, I think they all understand themselves to be within, although they have quite a bit of power, they understand themselves to be icons of black womanhood, and particularly Black middle class womanhood. What we don't have is a Black middle class Lady Gaga, right? Yeah, the way in which, can you be both, this powerful person, but also be considered to have kind of ownership of your body in a certain kind of way. I mean, think about the fact that Beyonce has to be such a fierce in order to kind of play out these kind of notions of kind of a certain kind of sexual agency. Something for us to think about. I mean, she couldn't be Beyonce. You know, the new phase of Beyonce. No, she's Sasha Fierce, and it's, you know, kind of
right. She can't be Beyonce and be that and be Sasha Fierce at the same time.
Right.
And I know you're not trying to think too much about Nicki Minaj, but you know, how do you put Nicki Minaj in this conversation, right? At least around this idea of agency over her body and her sexuality.
Yeah, and yet I'm glad you raised that, because I very much away from the hip hop scene. So thinking more about Liz Wright and performers that are doing different kinds of music. I mean, when I can't remember her name, when the Grammy took it away from that Justin Bieber.
Esperanza Spalding. Right.
Yeah, I'm a fan of hers, right? So
but that raises an interesting point, right? Because I think if you were to ask, definitely folks of our generation, but like the average American, to ask them to name a Nicki Minaj song, they probably wouldn't be able to tell you, right? But they know who Nicki Minaj is, right? And they know her physicality. Right, so that stuff even kind of transcends the music, I think, in ways that forces us, to have to pay attention to it regardless of whether that we want to or not.
Or I couldn't name the music, or I actually didn't see the clip on Saturday Night Live either, though. I mean, right. I'm really, I would say that it seems that the students here like her, and spending some time at the Hip Hop Archive here is, give me a sense. I, for a while was actually saying her name wrong, so probably would segue to thinking about. I mean, is there this notion that from the Little Kims? I mean, do you think she's probably in that category of hip hop
Lil'
performers?
Kim, Foxy Brown,
and Foxy Brown, people that were my generation, right? And I was still holding on to the possibility of being cool. I think that those are walking a line between raising these notions of Black women's hypersexuality and also presenting themselves as those who are actually in charge and in control of their sexuality. So there's a way in which you're trying to walking that line. Do they, it's much like current contemporary theater using blackface. Are they in control of this medium that has been used to defile and undermine and dehumanize Black people, or is it something that you raise and actually let it actually takes over and has its own power, and that you actually, even though you try to tame it, you actually lose out. I'm not sure. I always found people like Foxy Brown and Lil' Kim to be titillating, and in many ways, I'm more interested in the Beyonce model in terms of her being able to have control of her work, in terms of being a writer and having all this control.
Having control over her brand, right?
Her brand, in all its ways, much like OWN, much like Oprah, right? Being able to take control in that way. What does it mean? How they translate for the average middle-class Black woman who's pushing her baby carriage and checking her iPhone? I think that we have to think about the way in which these images circulate, because people may if Nicki Minaj is actually able to push against that stuff and present herself as someone with agency, is that really going to translate though with the broader public, and are they just going to key into what they've already known? And so this one mother who's in the park with her kid is going to get, the inappropriate comment. Right. Or the look,
because of Nicki Minaj, yeah. You're watching Left of Black. We're here with Lisa Thompson, Associate Professor of English at the State University of New York at Albany, current Du Bois Institute Fellow at Harvard University, the author of Beyond the Black Lady, Sexuality and the New African American Middle Class. I want to pick up on something that you just said in the last segment. Whether or not folks working in a contemporary moment have control over the images that get presented. And a lot of your work happens to deal with, how complex identity becomes within the space of performance, right? Outside of everyday life. What happens when blackness is staged? What happens when black female sexuality takes on a certain kind of life, in terms of the cinema. And you were very outspoken about the recent Broadway musical about the Scotsboro Boys, right? And the performance of blackface. Talk a little bit about how you thought about it, because I remember you have been one of the folks who talked openly about the fact that you thought that the musical was absolutely brilliant. Talk a little bit about the Scotsboro Boys production.
I'm really excited about today, actually. The Tony Award nominations came out. Scotsboro Boys received 5 nominations, including Best Musical, Best Book of a Musical, I think Best Original Score. Coleman Domingo received the nod for Best Lead Actor in a Musical. I believe I checked, it was about 5. Scotsboro Boys is a musical rendering of the Scotsboro Boys, not just a trial, but their lives. That's right. It's done by Cantor and Ebb, the storied duo who did Chicago, Kiss of the Spider Woman, and the director of Scotsboro Boys was, oh my goodness, I'm missing her name, Susan Stroman, who also directed The Producers. So these are a team of people who know how to take material that's a little tough
and difficult,
and play with it. And it was really heartbreaking to see people not being able to understand how complexly they were trying to render the story. It was done playing with the idea of minstrelsy and really undercutting that actual form. There's a silent witness character in the production, played stunningly by Sharon Washington, who does not speak at all until the end. And she's there throughout the production, and we find out at the end she's Rosa Parks. And it's just, takes you away. The music itself is beautiful. They do move quickly between satire and pathos. I mean, there's a great song called Go Back Home, which is beautifully sung about them, thinking about what it would mean to go back home. You have a sense of the way in which trains have occupied the imagination of young men, and how this actually becomes the way in which they're actually entombed in many ways, right? That thing that they thought was going to give them freedom ends up taking away their freedom. And they explore the notion of how they were treated by the guards. And these are all African American actors who play a variety of roles. Not only do they play the Scotsboro Nine, but they also play the jailers. They play white people. They play the white women that accuse them and reveal them to be liars. I mean, it's funny and it's heartbreaking, and it was amazing. I got shot down to New York when I found out it was closing to make sure I saw it, and I hope it does get a chance to come back.
Right, with the Tony Award nomination.
And I mean, it's stunning. The CD is available and it's beautiful. And it's funny, interesting playing it for my son, who has his favorite songs, and he's 5 years old. And he's like, no, turn it out. That's my favorite one. Go back. I'm like, oh my God. And him responding to some of the minstrel music and kind of stomping about, and you makes you realize this music is seductive, and the show gets at the seductiveness of these problematic
minstrelsies,
right, and there's a way in which we can be clever, but I also understand why people were upset, because it is a personal story, and I think that it would have been easier for people to deal with if more of the creative team behind the show had been African American, and so they could see that there was a certain kind of care being taken, and so that way they could feel a certain sense of trust, I think. It wasn't just enough to have the actors in those roles, but going to the talkback, they seemed to be very aware that of the importance of the show. But I think there was probably some missteps in terms of how they could have brought in the African American community to make them more comfortable, and it wouldn't have been the same kind of response to it. And it was interesting, like the telephone game where someone tells somebody something, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. There's only one scene, a very, very quick moment where they have blackface. They turn around and wipe it off immediately. So they never are performing in blackface, and actually they're performing as whites often. So it's, they're really playing with that idea. So it's really a brilliant show, and hopefully we'll be back. Luckily, we do have some clips on YouTube, and we have the off-Broadway version of the musical.
You mentioned, the effect that word of mouth has, particularly within Black networks, and particularly now because of social media, Facebook and Twitter, and I think about the pushback against the Scotsboro Boys. We could be talking about some of the early pushback against Precious, 2 years ago, and of course most recently, around Malcolm X: A Life of Reinvention. Manning Marable's book about Malcolm X. A lot of folks, who had not trudged through the 600 pages of this book, felt very comfortable pushing back, in terms of what they thought the book was about and what they wanted to accuse Dr. Marable of. But in that context, looking at the Scotsboro Boys in a different context, we have someone like Tyler Perry. And I did go to the movie theater this weekend and go see Tyler Perry's Big Happy Family, right? And it's another Tyler Perry movie, right? You laugh at the stuff you laugh at, the stuff that makes you cringe are gonna make you cringe. It made $25 million, over its first weekend, and Spike Lee, again, going back and forth about, all this stuff, Spike Lee's, Miracle at St. Anna made 9, right? And we're not talking about the opening weekend, right? It made 9. So that's a reality. What do you do with someone like Tyler Perry at this point in time, particularly given his popularity, right? You're a playwright yourself. What would you do, if Tyler Perry stepped to you and said that he wanted to do a cinematic treatment of your single Black female, your single Black woman, the way that he treated Indisaki Sean Gage, for colored girls?
I mean, I'm of two minds. I have a 5-year-old that needs to have a college education.
Real talk,
so
right? That's right. That's
when
real
do you
talk,
want it?
right?
Should I put it as a PDF? And then there's my artistic sensibility that I would love for him to. I was able to. I saw your show with Joan and Sophia, and I was thinking, they were right on about what it would mean for him as a Black feminist intervention Black male feminist intervention to go ahead and invest in reproducing more people who can tell our stories and having kind of backing it to do that. And he has the studio, so it'd be interesting to kind of think about. I would love to see what Casey Lemons would do with my show. And I also know some up and coming directors. My friend Fatima Washington is finishing her first feature right now in LA. Having resources makes all over, and I think it's great. I always argue for a world in which we can have a plethora of African American voices and sensibilities.
Where you can have a Tyler Perry, a Spike Lee, a Cassie Lemons, right? I mean, all these folks, and Anna Devere Smith, right? All these folks can exist in the same space. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, though, someone may mention I did a talk recently about my new book project on Black cultural trauma and contemporary African American theater and performance, and they said, well, why is Coleman Domingo and most of the things you're talking about? So, because I talk about Passing Strange, about a Black rocker who goes off to Europe to find himself a Black middle.
Stu, Stu.
Stu work. Coleman's in that, and he was also in, of course, Scotsboro Boys, and he's. By the way, you mentioned Miracle in St. Anna. He's in that too.
Right, and he directed Single Black Female also.
Yes. By the way, he's a friend of mine. He directed Single Black Female. Not only. We came up together in San Francisco, and then he went on to direct it in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, and then when it came, the New Professional Theater produced it off Broadway twice, and he directed both of those shows. And it really has been a great relationship where I call it kindred spirits, and being able to work with someone who understands. So I definitely believe you can have a Black male director do a Black woman's work. I mean,
he's a perfect example. Right.
Look to my plays have been men. so far. So it's been a mixture of sensibilities. And I think it's not really about that kind of essentialism. It's just the having kind of artistic, having it very connected to each other in an artistic way, I think, in terms of spiritual way. He actually just came to the Du Bois Institute and directed the a table reading of my new play, Monologues, about race and motherhood and age of anxiety. And he brought some amazing Broadway actors here to read the work. And it was great. It's about Black motherhood. He's never been a mother.
Right.
And but he has been a son and is very sensitive to that, and it's great. So it's interesting to think about the way in which someone like a Tyler Perry functions in the world, but there's so many talented people. But it looks like from today's nominations that talent rises to the top, and perseverance, and we'll see what happens when they announce the winners.
You've been watching Left of Black, and we were joined this afternoon by Lisa Thompson, the original L Boogie, Associate Professor of English at the State University of New York at Albany, one of my old stomping grounds, so
yes.
What's up to the people up at SUNY. She is a current fellow at the Du Bois Institute at Harvard. We'll holler a little bit at Skip Gates and Marcy Morgan and Larry Bobo. She's also the author of Beyond the Black Lady, Sexuality in the New African American Middle Class, University of Illinois Press, 2009. She is the writer of Single Black Female, which has been produced in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York City. And of course, she is currently finishing the Monologues, as well as a new book on Black cultural trauma in the African American stage. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, Lisa.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Take care.
Take care, man.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.